Hope you've had a good week. We're going to be talking today about emes and sheker in children's education. The shir is dedicated to Rachalea Bas Rav Chaim Tzvi, as always. Should be Ilui for her neshama. And we'll begin. The issue of emes and sheker, arguably, is the most central issue in chinuch. It's the only issue about which the Vilna Gaon said, this is where you have to be serious. This is where you have to be strict. This is where we have to be unrelenting. This is big. So we have to begin, at least, even though this is chinuch and not hashkafa, we have to talk about why emes is so important. The reason why emes is so important is that we only know Hashem through the world and our responses to it, through our responses to His signature, His saying, Ani Hashem, in every situation, person, and object that we encounter. When we use words to describe what we encounter to make it more palatable to us, then we've lost Hashem's imprint. Now, taking this idea further, the way Hashem created the world is that every deed carries with it a consequence, positive or negative. When we use words to avoid consequences, then we're also changing Hashem's order of things. We're creating a fantasy world, again, where His imprint can't be found. So emes is hard to underestimate. Emes, by definition, is the big picture, the whole picture. We often confuse emes with accuracy, which isn't always the same thing. Emes means how Hashem sees it, the big picture. So, of course, there are times when you could change the truth for all sorts of reasons, because the simple truth, the verbal acuity in describing something this way or that, sometimes conceals the bigger picture rather than reveals it. So we see this with what seems to be very deceitful when Yaakov said, I'm Esav Bechorecha. So even though he meant I'm me and Esav is your Bechor, it seems deceptive. It is deceptive, except that he, in essence, in everything that a Bechor was, he was the Bechor, he was the spiritual heir. So truth is a huge value, and even the times when lying is permitted is only because sometimes the lie leads you to the truth in a higher sense. This world is called Alma de Shikra, the false world. Why? Because the Gashmi world is both our way of knowing God, but it also conceals God at the same time. So all sorts of things like cause and effect conceal Hashem. Power and everything comes forth from power seems to conceal Hashem. So we're in Alma de Shikra, and our job is to be people of emes, to be seekers, to see the whole picture, to see the divine imprint. We have to begin this path when we're young, which is why chinuch for emes is enormously important. So with this in mind, we'll start talking about chinuch for emes in very young children. Very, very young children are experimenting with words. So oftentimes they imagine something and they themselves are not sure where the borders are. So you could correct them, but the correction isn't meant to make them feel bad about what they said. It's just to get them straight. So I'll give you an example. A very young child, and by very young, since remember, babies aren't born speaking, so we're talking about a child from, let's say, 2.5 to 5. A very young child comes and says, I'm Noach, and you're the animals. Come, let's go on the boat. Okay? He knows he's not Noach. If you were to, and he also knows the bathtub's not the ark, and he also knows that the shower head's not the Arubot HaShamayim. He knows it. But what he doesn't know is that by describing himself as being Noach, because he feels like Noach, that he's departed from emes, meaning his emotional emes at that moment is I'm Noach. His intellectual emes is a different story, and at this age they don't necessarily meld so easily. So you have to teach the child the vocabulary of imagination, which is, in Hebrew, ki'ilu. Yes, you're ki'ilu Noach, meaning you're like Noach, and this is ki'ilu the flood, and these are ki'ilu the animals. Wow, it's so much fun to play ki'ilu. Okay, in English, the words would be, let's pretend. Yes, let's pretend you're Noach. Let's pretend these are the animals. And okay, you understand this? You have to introduce this vocabulary. So this vocabulary, first of all, makes it easier for the child at this stage to separate emotional imagery from reality. They have a tough time with reality anyway. But it also introduces them slowly to the idea of this, that you can't say something is how it isn't. So these are very important words to introduce. Okay. Next thing. Children, very young children, will lie to avoid blame. You know how people will say, only people who have no children, they'll say, oh, I could tell in his eyes, he was so innocent, he would never forget it. Nobody likes being blamed. Nobody likes consequences. So even a very young child who, let's say, spilt the cup of water, you come in and you make the mistake of saying who spilt the water, will sometimes say, not me, him, her, it fell by itself, whatever, because he doesn't want disapproval. So the remedy here isn't to never disapprove, because that's not going to work in real life. Of course you don't like having a wet carpet just as well as you like a dry carpet, and pretending you do isn't going to work. But your response there would be to correct him and just get on with it. Oh, you spilled the water, hand me a towel. No speech. No, why did you say you did? Of course it didn't spill itself. Nothing spills it. You don't have to go there. But you do have to make it clear that we have to deal with things as they are, not as they aren't. For that reason, it helps to reward children if they own up to the truth. Now this is tricky because children are smart. They're smarter than we are emotionally, just not quite as well informed. So if they're getting paid off for doing the wrong thing and talking about it, they'll soon do the wrong thing and talk about it. So that's not so good either. So if you're the kind of mother who could have like consistent punishments for wrong deeds and give a reward for telling the truth, that's the best thing. For instance, let's say your 4-year-old purposely took away the baby's toys and left the baby screaming hysterical in the infant seat. And you didn't see it. Your back was turned for like the split second it takes for that to happen as you're taking the eggs out of the frying pan. And you say to the child, not who did this, because it's a stupid question when you know. You say, someone took away the baby's toys. That's not good. I'm going to take away that child's toys for a few minutes also because you have to know what it feels like. But if you tell me the truth, then it'll be still there. You still have to learn. You still have to have the punishment. But somebody's going to get a little bit of ice cream, candy, whatever food reward you give for this age. And this is the age of food rewards. So he's rewarded for the truth and still punished for the misdeed. Rewarding for the truth and not punishing for the misdeed is not good chinuch. Punishing for the misdeed and not rewarding for the child for telling the truth will influence the child to lie in the future to avoid the punishment for the misdeed. So you really do have to do both, but I recognize that it's hard to pull off. It requires a lot of emotional detachment, and it requires a lot of consistency, which are hard to come by at mealtime. Okay, more things at this age. At this age, no doubt you'll want to tell the child stories that are really just imaginary because they're so delightful and children like them so much. But you have to use the right vocabulary. He can't think that Cat in the Hat and Noah and the Ark are on the same level of truth. He has to understand this is real, this happened. And this is just a story that people tell for fun. So again, you have to use the vocabulary. This is pretend. Let's pretend there was the Cat in the Hat. Remember him? And now we're going to pretend that the Cat in the Hat came back. Okay? Or Ki'ilu. You remember how Ki'ilu we spoke about the Cat in the Hat? Wasn't he fun, Ki'ilu? Now Ki'ilu comes back. So you could have fun, and you could enjoy the rhymes and enjoy the imagery, but you're not taking the child into a place where he confuses truth from falsehood. A child who confuses truth from falsehood will easily make up stories, innocently, because they're interesting. They'll say that they've done things they haven't done, been places they haven't been, things that happened in school that didn't happen, happened. Because they don't see any difference between a book in which things that are not true are portrayed as innocent and fun to read, and when they make up a story, it's also innocent and fun to hear. So what's the difference? So it has to be clear, otherwise they'll be making up stories when they're 50. Okay, this is something you have to nip in the bud. Okay, that's at this age. Let's move on to the next stage in childhood. So we're moving now from 5 to 8. At this age, the child's ability to differentiate between imagery and reality is much sharper. So not only do they know that this is what happened and that this is not what happened, but they also are they're morally discerning enough to know that there's something wrong with saying something that didn't happened. Or that one is what one really isn't. They understand that. So your job here is to enforce this and to watch out for lies. How do you enforce this recognition that this is true and that this isn't true? First of all, by being scrupulously honest yourself. So that means that when you're telling pretend stories, being extremely scrupulous to say, this is a story that didn't really happen. Or when you're telling even some of the midrashim, that are guzma'ot, you have to say, wow, the midrash is telling us how we could imagine it, but really, you understand this? We have to be able to do that. Okay, at this age, social acceptance is more important than at a younger age. So children will lie for social acceptance. So sometimes they'll make up stories about you or your husband or the children, giving you accomplishments that you haven't had, credibility that you wish you had, even sometimes appearance that you wish you had. You have to correct it. I remember once hearing my son and another little boy having an argument. They were fighting. I don't remember what the issue was. If there was, at this age, there was not necessarily so much of an issue. And there was some hitting, and I was like coming down to separate them. As I'm running down I hear them saying, "You can't hit me. My father's a policeman. Yeah, my father's a soldier." Okay, this is what they're saying. Now, my son's father is a Maggid Shir in Or Samach at that time. The other boy's father is a social worker. But the other story sounds a lot better. Now, again, they know the truth. They're just enjoying it the way you and I enjoy reading fiction or seeing a play. So they have to be taught at this age not to say what isn't true as though it's true. So even though it's not so pleasant, you would have to say at that point, Yitzchak, Tati is a Maggid Shir. Yisrael, your father's a social worker. But it was a fun thing to say. It would be nice if Ki'ilu this was happening. Okay, you have to be firm. You have to be very firm with their defensive lies. The Vilna Gaon, as I told you at the beginning, goes as far as saying that you could hit your child for lying and covering things up, because otherwise they will learn very quickly that most of the time lies are believed, and most of the times you can get away with it. And most of the time your life will be easier if you lie than if you don't. So if they come to associate lies with extreme negativity from the people who they love, it changes the balance. So you have to, of course, since lying is so bad, you have to keep the severity that you store up for responses to defensive lying, and not use that for other things. In other words, if a child tells a defensive lie, for instance, I didn't do it, he did it, or my teacher's such an idiot, she made me do whatever, and you would have to correct the usage of idiot as well. And it was like all her fault, and she came into the class late, and I just came in at the same time, and she just marked me late for no reason. And then she sent me to the Menahelet, and then the Menahelet believed that Mishugat, that sort of thing. You're listening to lie after defensive lie after defensive lie. You have to take it apart. You have to point out which parts are true and which parts are not. And you have to punish them for the lie severely. You have to do it. It's not pleasant, and it's very counterintuitive, because we live in a society in which defensive lying is acceptable. So you have no choice here. Other kinds of lies that take place at this age. Some children at this age have imaginary friends. I had an imaginary friend. So again, the child really knows that the imaginary friend is just that, an imaginary friend. They know that other people don't see them. They know that the imaginary friend doesn't need to eat or drink or sleep or go to the bathroom. They know that the imaginary friend comes and goes. So they know the truth. The imaginary friend is only imaginary. Acting as though you believe that the imaginary friend is there isn't good for the child. So if the child, for instance, I had several imaginary friends in different kufot in my early childhood, but one of them was Tonto. I was the Lone Ranger, who was a cowboy hero on TV, and I had Tonto, who was my faithful Indian assistant, who people couldn't see him, but that didn't mean he wasn't there to me, and I would play endless games. I was an only child, so Tonto and I would have many adventures. I certainly knew Tonto wasn't real. And my mother would sometimes play with us. She would say, "Hey, Tonto, sit down and eat." Together with kimosabi, which was how supposedly Indians greeted their superiors. Okay, in that very unpolitically correct era. What do you do with imaginary friends? You have to accept them as friends of Ki'ilu. This takes us back. Okay, so mocking the child is too hard for the child to bear, saying, "What are you talking about? There's nobody in the room but you." I don't know, are you crazy? Who are you talking to? You're talking to yourself. There's nobody else here. That's devastating. But you don't have to introduce yourself to this imaginary friend as though he's real either. "Hi, Tonto, I'm pleased to meet you. I'm Tzipora's mother." Okay, you don't have to do this. You have to say, "It was fun playing with Tonto, Ki'ilu. That was a great game of Ki'ilu. Now it's time for lunch." Okay, clear? So, I remember once pretending I believed in an imaginary friend with one of my aunts, and I thought that she would sort of take delight in it, and that we could use words to sort of bond on the basis of this imaginary friend's imaginary adventures. And she was like an old Litvisher woman of the old school. She said, "Feh, that's not true." So that was that. Okay, at this age, in school sometimes, they are not as diligent as they should be about separating fact and fiction. You have to really, really put your 2 cents in. When you see that the children are given homework assignments in which things that are not true and didn't happen are presented as facts, you have to make it very clear that this isn't acceptable to you. Okay, other lies. Other lies at this age will include manipulative lies. Everybody else is going, okay, that sort of thing. Don't tolerate it. Let's go further up on the scale. Okay, lying between the ages of 8 and 12. The lying the kids do there is much more like our lying than it is the imaginative lying of very young children. The main reason at this age that they'll lie is for social acceptance, to avoid trouble, and to make their stories more interesting than they are, just like adults. You can't let them. They're still unformed. They could still drop the habit at this point. So you have to be able to say sometimes, that's much more interesting than the way it really was. But the way it really was interesting. You have to be able to say these things, which are painful to say. When they lie defensively, you have to sometimes call them on it. Now here's something to consider though. Especially towards the end of this period, at the age of 12, sometimes even 11. Children's self-esteem is exquisitely fragile. So because of this, if you catch them in a lie, what happens then is, because the feeling of rejection is more than they could bear, because of their own fragility, they'll stop talking. So that means they'll come home from school. What happened to school? Say nothing. Okay, where were you in the afternoon? Around. So the reason is that they want approval desperately, and they want validation desperately. And if they've come to associate your comments with lack of validation and lack of appreciation, they're not going to talk. So because of this, you have to very cautiously, at this age rather than earlier age where you could be much more upfront, you have to cautiously and consistently try to build up their self-esteem in other ways, so that they could feel accomplished enough without lying, and then you could move on to correcting the misstatements. So for instance, let's say a boy in this age group, although he's 12, he'll be 13 next year, let's say he's one of the older ones in the class, one of the younger ones in the class, so everybody is talking about where they're going next. And he knows where he's going next. An application was made. He's going where your husband has some pull. But he would like to say he's considering this place and he's considering that place. He may even make up that someplace called him up. So again, if you overhear this, you could say, not like, what are you telling lies? That, like, they can't hear it. Adolescence is too fragile. But they could hear humor. Okay, they could hear, well, if it's that easy to get into Chevron, I think I'll try too. Okay, or whatever. Sometimes you have to not hear the lie at all. Meaning, their fragility is so great that you don't have to hear it. Which again, with young children, is never the truth. So for instance, your 12-year-old with whom you're having some trouble comes in. Okay, he did come home way before Shabbos, but he didn't come home when you said. You said to be home by 1, he's home at 3. Now there still is plenty of time, so the issue isn't Chilul Shabbos, the issue is Chinuch. And he came home with his friend, and they're backslapping and having a rare old time, and then you hear it. You hear him telling little lies, or hiding things from you. Maybe they bought something with no permission. Maybe they had pizza and used money that was like lying around. Whatever it is, they were dishonest. You have to ask yourself, right now, today, is he in a position to hear me? Or will he get defensive because his friend is here? If the answer is he'll get defensive, then don't say anything. Saying anything at all will lead to more lies. In general, don't corner children. Here are some ways through which parents corner children. Who did this? Now, most of the time it's pretty clear who did this. And if it's not, you could ask children one at a time without them necessarily noticing that they're being asked who did it, if you need to find out. The only reason you would need to find out would be to see who has to make reparations, who has to fix it. It's not just to leave them with guilt, always. Let's move a little bit further to real adolescence, that delightful stage of life. Okay, there are social reasons why adolescents lie a lot. They want their friends to like them, so they'll tell lies to their friends. Oh, you look so cute. Or, that teacher was like so stupid, I can't believe she said that to you. That sort of thing. So they'll act like their friends' lawyers. They'll act like literature critics. They'll say whatever they want to say. If you still have influence on them, you still have to correct them. You have to correct them. And obviously, certainly at this age, but even younger, you have to be a person of truth. That means that they have to know that when you say no, it's no. When you say yes, it's yes. When you say maybe, it really does mean maybe. It's not just a way of avoiding saying no. They have to see you as completely honest. They have to not hear exaggerated stories come out of your mouth. They have to not see you not being defensive. They have to see you not making excuses where you could have made excuses. They have to see you not saying things like, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm busy now, I'll call you back as soon as possible. When they're not busy at all, they just don't, you're not busy at all, you just don't feel like talking to that person. They have to see you as honest. They have to see their own efforts towards honesty validated. Like, wow, you did this amazingly, I'm so surprised, that sort of thing. Okay, big lies. Tragically, one of the things that we've come to encounter more are kids who are living double lives. Now, you could argue everyone lives a double life to some degree. Is the person who stood in the Eilah the person who said a bracha with no kavanah 10 minutes later? Okay, but sometimes it's extreme. So here are two extremities. You'll have teenagers who, for various reasons, which I'll go into in a moment, no longer emotionally identify with the frum world. So what they'll do sometimes is they'll continue to wear the clothes, they'll continue to talk the talk, but they have a whole other life. There have been cases even of people who marry. If you could imagine what a tragedy this is. The young man or the young woman thinks that he's marrying or she's marrying a frum person, and then they discover it's all an act. Now, how does this develop? Why is this person wearing the clothes and walking the walk and then living a different life? Why doesn't she just go over to the other side? So the reason is that when you go over to the other side, there are consequences. Financial consequences, social consequences, huge emotional consequences. So they're afraid to go to the other side. But they're not frum. This is much more pernicious than the archetypical off-the-derech kid who looks like an off-the-derech kid. This kid, and there have been people who eat on Yom Kippur, who do whatever you can imagine, but still walk the walk, and still wear the clothes, and still talk the talk, but it's not integrated. So in a tragic situation as this, it's usually better to have the child be accepted, almanat kain. They stop wearing the clothes and talking the talk. It's better for them. So approaching a child such as this and saying, I'd rather have you dress like very narrowly within halacha so we could deal with each other like real people. Take off the edel madel outfit. I know what you've been doing, you know what you've been doing, so we could be honest with each other. Now, if the child will dress within halacha, that's certainly the best way to go. If the child is so far gone that they won't, that if you tell them, if you give them permission not to dress from, what they'll do is dress unsneously or take off their kippah. You can't do that. So what you have to do alternatively is to make it clear to them that you know they're living a double life and that you accept them and want to help them live with this terrible, they have to know you see it as terrible, this terrible, terrible level of inner conflict. Sometimes, so I'm giving you a third take on this, sometimes you shouldn't let them know that they're living a double life because they're really just on the edge. They really could be brought back relatively easily. But the shame of knowing that you know will drive them away because nobody likes feeling ashamed. So let's take this to a concrete circumstance. A set of parents overhear their son on the phone on one of these terrible numbers where they hear terrible things, enjoying it. And they have to make a pretty instantaneous decision of how to respond. So let's go through the three responses. So one of them, it would be to go over and say, don't listen to this. It's not good for you. If you need something, I'll buy you decent fiction. I'll do whatever you need that's within halacha, but don't go there because it could destroy you. Or you can confront the child, which would be saying, I know what you're doing. This is a porn station. You shouldn't be listening to this. Don't wear these clothes if you're listening to this because it's a chilul Hashem. Or you could act like you don't hear. Those are your options. Let's talk about when they're applicable. If the child is just experimenting, the best thing is to act like you didn't hear. The reason why that's the best thing is because the shame will drive them further. If the child is doing this, but many, many other things that you know about, and this has been taking place over a long time, possibly years, the game is a chilul Hashem, and they're seeing that they could talk to you without playing the game, without paying the emotional consequences, may lead them back. If it's somewhere between these two extremes, trying to bring them forth and saying, what do you really want and who are you? And really trying to understand the child is what you need to do. And the first step towards that may be, I know that you're not the person who's playing the game. So what you should do depends on who the child is. So there is sometimes a time when you have to let them, when you have to not see the lie, a time when you have to respond very, very severely, and a time in which you have to use the observation that you now know the lie as a springboard to showing the child that it's safe to talk to you and that you accept them. A response of not saying anything out of laziness is a whole other story. I want to tell you the consequences of that. If you decide to ignore it, and the reason isn't because the child's just experimenting, but it's because you can't handle it, you don't know what to say, you're scared, and you're hoping it'll just go away, the child will interpret it as you don't care. That will happen, and this is not the message you want to give. Okay, let's go to another sort of dishonesty, which would be financial dishonesty. Financial dishonesty? Okay. Let's go back to very little kids. A very young child has a very limited picture of what's mine and what's yours and what's his. To him, what's usually been his is his. What's always been yours is yours. And what's sometimes is confusing. So a very young child will take what they want from another child because they think they should have it, because they don't get that it really belongs to somebody else. So somewhere at this age you have to talk to them about Hashem's giving people what they need through their parents, and you're not allowed to take what's somebody else's, what's theirs. And it's dishonest because it's not the way Hashem wanted it. So notice you're teaching the child the definition of honest as being within the frame of Hashem's bigger picture. without using that vocabulary. Okay, children who steal and lie, which many young children do to some degree, have to be treated severely because this can't be acceptable or viewed as something that one may do. So this means a child comes back with mysterious potato chips from the grocery. You sent him for milk and he came back with milk and potato chips hidden in his sweater, and with enough money just to buy milk. You don't have to be Sherlock Holmes. You do have to tell him about how hard the man in the grocery store works and how it's all to support his family. And now there won't be so much money, etc., etc. Till the child understands that when you steal, there's a loser. They don't always get it. At a young age, they think it's like a game where there's only a winner. They have to understand that there's a loser, that he's losing parnassa. So at that time, what you would have to do would be to explain that to him, and if possible, to go to the store on your own without the child first, and to arrange with the storekeeper, if it's possible, for you to go to the store without the child and explain to the storekeeper what happened, and to pay him back. And tell him that you're going to bring the child with the potato chips or whatever, and that he should be thrilled to receive his tshuva. Okay. Oh, what a good boy you are. Thank you so much. I was wondering what happened. Okay. Now I see how honest you are. Okay. If you could arrange that with the storekeeper, that's the best thing. If you can't, then you still have to, let's say it's the supermarket or whatever, or a non-Jewish store, then you still have to bring him back to return it, and he has to suffer the pain of his dishonesty. Okay, older children. Older children oftentimes are in the same thing. They see what they want. They don't have what they want. And suddenly what they want appears through all sorts of means. So this could be taking, which is how they call stealing. This could be getting money in ways that you don't want them to. Let's say leaving school a little bit early to babysit so they could have money to buy whatever it is that they want. Webs within webs. So the only thing that works here is that they really, and you have to work on this, they believe that you want them to be happy. At which point you could tell them, if you need something, you could tell me. A lot of the times I'll buy it. And if we can't, then together we'll accept, that everyone's supposed to have what they have to have. And we aren't all meant to have swimming pools, and we aren't all meant to have tennis courts, and we all aren't meant to have $900 shoes, and we're not even all meant to have colored pencils. Okay, whatever it is we're meant to have, we'll do our best with the money Hashem gives us. We work hard, Hashem gives us money, we'll do our best. You have to make them return what's not theirs. You have to be sophisticated enough not to go in for lies. I found it. My friend gave it to me. Really? Whatever. Okay, older childhood. When older children steal, it's much more serious. Both in terms of what they steal, they tend to steal things that are expensive. But also in terms of this, that it shows that they never integrated the values that you're trying to teach them. So the basic value of this, that Hashem is the one who distributes goods and other people have needs, is something they didn't learn. So if they didn't learn that, you have to teach it to them. You may have to use somebody else as a backup. But those are the two lessons. Again, Hashem gives people what they need to have. If it's not yours, you don't need it. A. And B, whenever you take something that somebody else's, you've created a victim. And they have to hear something, certainly at this older age in childhood, certainly in the early teens, they have to hear that Hashem will hold them accountable for what they say. That it's embarrassing to be caught in a lie. Imagine you're embarrassed that I caught you in this lie. Imagine Olam Haba Hashem saying, you said what? Okay, they have to be ashamed to lie. Okay, certainly when it's accompanied by taking what isn't theirs. Let's move on to real teenagers, our favorite age. Teenagers lie to parents a lot. They lie to teachers somewhat. They lie to anybody who they feel they have to lie to do what they want. So in the teenage years, lying is a symptom. It's not just a problem, it's a symptom of an additional problem. The additional problem is that they don't feel that they could talk to you. So they'll make up lies rather than talking to you honestly. They don't see you as a safe place. It's critical at this age that you be a safe place, which doesn't mean that you approve of everything. But it just means that you approve of the child in a basic sense, and not what he's doing. So an example of that would be, let's say you're a very upright individual. You're very careful with what you do and don't do, and this is how you raised your kids. You have to have a conscience. You have to do it right. And you discover that your daughter had babysitting money, or maybe it really wasn't babysitting money. You don't even know. And using that money, she bought things that you don't let her own. Let's say you don't let her own certain magazines, or you don't let her learn, or any magazines, or makeup. And suddenly it appears, and it's for money that she claimed she earned and is hers, and it's not necessarily true. So there are two issues here. One is the lie. Where'd you get money for this stuff? I got it from babysitting. But the other is the fact that she couldn't tell you honestly that she wants makeup, or whatever other item she wanted. So what that tells you is one of two possible things. One is she loves you so much that she can't bear to devastate you. And the other is she dreads consequences so much that she doesn't want the heat, which is much more common, obviously. So, why should you make yourself a safe place? Because burying your head in the sand means that you've basically given up on your kids. So you have to be safe enough to talk to. So that means always at this age, no matter what they tell you if they've done, your first response is, wow, where? With who? Gosh, was it nice? Okay, so your first response would be the response you had if you were talking to anyone's kid. Okay, the next response, if they feel heard and accepted as a person, is this really what you want to do? And they'll say, sure, I had a good time, if they did. But even so, you could say, but this is really what you want to do? You're like 17 years old already. You want to be the girl who did this? That's what's good for you. Think about who you want to be. Does this fit with who you want to be? Is this really who you want to be? And then you have to show some closeness. You have to build a relationship so they could feel safe with you. You do this by taking them out for a drink, let's say, once in a while. I don't mean, obviously not an alcoholic drink, milkshake, whatever. By talking to them about your stuff. By making decisions with them where appropriate. Do you think that the purple table settings are better than the off-white? I'm not sure. Now in this case it doesn't matter maybe to you it would matter more than it would be to me. But it doesn't matter if placemats are purple or off-white that much. But it does matter that the teenager feels included and not patronized. So the more the teenager feels included, beloved, and bonded, the more likely he or she is to stay where they are and not go looking for affection somewhere else. There are exceptions to this. If a teenager is rejected, then the only place of refuge they have is lies. So I've seen parents create this situation. You have a boy who's out of yeshiva. And the yeshiva no longer claims that he's in yeshiva because they have to be aware that the government does spot checks and they can't have people on the attendance sheets who don't come. It's not 1 day and it's not 2 days. Let's say it's a year and a half. What's going to be now? What's going to be? So what's going to be is that the boy child who isn't learning is eligible for the draft in Israel. And you could get out of it. There are all sorts of ways of getting out of it. You could be sick, you could be crazy, you could be this, you could be that. The question is whether it's closer to the real truth of who this child should be, to even have to go to that path to avoid 3 years in a bad environment. Most poskim will say it is. Many poskim will say, but the child should be responsible enough to deal with the issue with integrity. Okay, other big lies teenagers tell. Sometimes girls have double lives. They have boyfriends, their parents don't know about it. The parents, again, very upright, very frum, very proper, very appropriate. They live on Rehov Rashbam, they're the Kanievskis, and the daughter's living a double life. So the reason is always is that no one taught her what to do with her desire for kina, taiva, and kavod. She would never use those words, but that's what they are. And she finds solace in having boyfriends or street friends because they're who make her chashuv. So unless she knows that you know already, it's usually better not to know. But it's better to present her with options, meaning family trips, interesting things, rather than being confrontational, until such time that her self-esteem is developed enough that you could say, who do you want to be? Okay. Another problem with honesty with kids. Kids will discover that other adults treat adults as though they're potential liars. So, they see you go to the store, and you say to the man, "Is this silver?" And he says yes. And then he also sees you looking to see, does it say 925 on the inside? That's telling you think he's a liar, but you're continuing to buy there. This throws children. So what you have to say, you have to teach them the rule of kabdehu v'chashdehu, so they don't perceive it erroneously as dishonesty. So the rule is be cordial, but be cautious. Tell them that. This is important from when they're very young. Be cordial, but cautious. So that would mean, and this would save so many people so much grief, if the proverbial candy man comes to the 7-year-old girl and offers her something to go in the car, and she knows it's not right because it's a man and she's been told not to speak to strange men, more than once, more than twice, by more than one person. She knows the truth. But she's enticed because she wants the attention, oftentimes even more than the candy. Okay, this could be the beginning of a double life. So in order to keep this from happening, okay, you would have to also build her self-esteem enough that she doesn't want to be there, that she's not vulnerable to wanting a double life. So an interesting thing that people often say is you should take the child aside and tell them in the street it's no Gan Eden, their friends will talk about them and build. I want to tell you, off the derech, kids run in packs. They're often very loyal to each other. They're often much nicer to each other than anybody else who's been in the child's life. That's a lie. Don't go there. They are enormously confused and have no direction. That's a different story. So again, your goal is to get the girl to be honest enough to tell you where she's at through acceptance and compassion as a means, with the ends of getting her back on track. So, emes and sheker then, we've spoken about in 3 different levels. We spoke about verbal emes and sheker, we've spoke about material emes and sheker, we've spoke about some of the big shkarim. So just by way of conclusion, you want to at some time, especially with your older adolescents, but even with your younger ones, teach them the value of thinking honestly. Teach them about dan l'kaf suchut, that you could see the same person in more than one way, but the truer way, the more encompassing way, the broader way, would have to include their higher self. When children hear that, they become far more honest. They don't have a need to demonize people, so they won't have to say this group is this and that group is that. Okay, and once that need is silenced, they could be V'Yalovdei Hashem. So you have a task ahead of you, and remember, don't be too soft on this one. Have a great week.